Good evening, Hendrick Hudson community. My name is Joseph Hochreiter. I'm the superintendent of the Hendrick Hudson School District. Today is Tuesday, March 23rd. It's a few minutes after 6 o'clock. Welcome to those of you who are with us on our Zoom or watching on YouTube. This is our sixth and final community meeting as we share some information and take your questions and hopefully have a dialogue with regards to the potential implementation of the Princeton plan in the Hendrick Hudson School District. In addition to these 6 meetings, we've held 4 PTA meetings over the last week and a half, and in fact, I guess 6 PTA meetings if you count 2 more at BV a couple Fridays ago. So we've been trying to get the word out and try to engage the community. We've heard loud and clear that folks wanted to create an environment where we could have a dialogue and a conversation. We have opened ourselves up with Zoom and Google Meets to do just that. We hope that the time we spend together around about the next hour or so could be exactly that, a conversation with those who have questions who are live with us on the Zoom. We just have a couple ground rules. The first ground rule is we ask everyone to stay on mute because we do have a series of questions we'd like to get to from community members that sent them in advance. So we do have questions and statements from 3 community members, and we typically start our time together going over those questions and providing those answers. And then we'll open it up to those who are with us for any questions or commentary, and that may lead to a discussion, hopefully, or folks on the Zoom will just give their opinion with regards to the Princeton plan. Joining us is Dr. Margaret Roller. She is our Executive Director for Curriculum and Instruction, and Lisa Shookman, who is our Executive Director for PPS. That includes all things regarding special education and student supports. And so these two have played a vitally important role in helping us communicate what is and what is not the Princeton plan, and what the strengths and weaknesses are, and what the opportunities and threats are as we consider moving toward the Princeton plan. So with that, I'm going to read and address some of the questions, as I said, that we received earlier, and I'll try to introduce everyone who asked a question. They may be with us on the Zoom or watching at home, hopefully, so they can so they know that their questions are answered. So the first one is from Agnes Layden. Agnes would like to know, how much money will the district save next year if the Princeton plan is implemented? Also, is this a one-time savings or consistent savings each year going forward? How much will the tax increase be without implementing the Princeton plan? So really good questions, Agnes. Thanks for sending them in. How much money will the district save? Basically, we look at implementing the Princeton plan is a cost reduction. Obviously, with the closure of Indian Point, that's taking place in about 5 weeks. Indian Point will cease operations on the last day of April. With Indian Point's departure is about 30% of our budget. Right? Indian Point accounts for 30% of our budget, around $25 million. And while some of those dollars have been restored or reallocated, certainly we do not have a one-to-one replacement for every dollar that leaves with Indian Point in terms of new revenue coming in. So we know that we had some major decisions to make and some opportunities to look at some of our systems and structures to see if there could be savings over time. The Princeton plan, if implemented, would save approximately $2 million in expenses each year. Presentation we provided to the community a few months ago, late June or late January or early February, unfortunately, implementing the Princeton plan reduces staff to deliver instruction. It does not eliminate programs. And it does not take away any opportunities, instructional opportunities for students. The reality is having more kids in the same place at the same time that need the same service or grade level instruction, we can streamline our delivery much more efficiently. And so the Princeton plan would call for a reduction of 14 staff. An estimated savings would be about $2 million. So It's not a tax reduction, but it's a tax avoidance. All right. So basically, every year we keep the Princeton plan, or I'm sorry, every year we stay status quo, 3 elementary schools by neighborhood, as opposed to implementing the Princeton plan. The delta, or the difference, is about $2 million each year. In terms of tax avoidance, that's about a 4.5% tax avoidance. All right. The district raises about $430,000 for every 1% we increase taxes, right? We increase taxes to increase revenue so the district can pay its bills, cost of living adjustment, those sort of things. So think of it that way. Think of it that to keep the status quo, we basically need $2 million more in revenue, or about 4.5% more in taxes each year to keep the status quo, as opposed to implementing the Princeton plan. So $2 million is the number in terms of savings we've been talking about for a while now. It's not a one-time savings because it's structural, right? So what happens is we reduce the expenses one time, and then it's baked into our budget. So it's around a $2 million difference every year we don't implement this. So while it's a savings the first year, we would experience those savings every year that we keep the Princeton plan, as opposed to the status quo 3 elementary schools. So I hope that makes sense. How much will the tax increase be? We talked about that. It's around 4.5% tax avoidance. All right. So it's important we get our phrases correct, because in order to raise $2 million in revenue, we would increase taxes about 4.5%. And how much will the tax increase be without implementing the Princeton plan? So our budget updates every week now. We're having Board of Education meetings. Our potential tax increase without the Princeton plan hovers anywhere between 6.5% and 7%. And why does it hover, and why is it not fixed? Because our budget is not complete in terms of the revenue we receive from New York State. All right. We build a budget based on revenue assumptions, and a major player in our revenue stream is New York State. So it's always an assumption. It's always a conservative assumption, because we don't want to assume that we're going to receive more aid from New York State. Any additional aid is certainly bonus to the district and to the community in terms of savings in the out years. So hope that answers your question, Agnes, and if it doesn't, we'll be able to get to you in a little bit after we go through the other questions. So just hang on there. Another question from Laura Wentz. Laura would like to know if the district may be eliminating 14 positions, how much are you saving? I think we talked about that. How much will it cost to bring staff in to teach enrichment in STEM? Are you actually going to save money, or are you just shifting to another budget line? If you aren't saving anything, why are you changing the system that has been in place in years? That is a great question. And I know Dr. Roller's eyes light up when we talk about this. So I'm going to toss it over to her in a second. I want to be really clear. What the Board of Education asked us to do is to identify what the potential savings were implementing the Princeton plan, taking students in the 3 elementary school system we have now and organizing them by grade level. All right. Regardless of what school would have which grade level. Let's call them school A, B, and C. All right. The idea, though, or the feedback we've received, is that rearranging elementary instruction and having students change schools, that could be taxing on those students. And certainly we've heard it could be taxing on the families, and we understand that. We had a stakeholder group of about 35 staff, parents, and community members, spent a good number of hours, at least 10 hours, with representatives from Somers, Tarrytown, and the Ossining School District. All 3 of those districts have a version of the Princeton plan. And what we came away from those meetings were that those elementary schools, many of them were able to offer different programs for students that we can't. For example, some of those schools have a dual language program to very, very young children. Some of those school districts have pre-K programs. Some of those districts are considering or have implemented a STEM program, as you mentioned, for 4th and 5th grade students. The issue is we have an opportunity to save $2 million and through tax avoidance, keep our taxes low in an era of Indian Point going away. Or over time, have a conversation with the community because a lot of parents are asking, is it worth it, right? Is all of this change worth tax savings, tax avoidance? And what our stakeholder committee spent a lot of time talking about, and you may have heard that in the report out that happened a couple of weeks ago, they started to dream a little bit and started to think of what could be if we were to repurpose some of those 14 positions into some of the programs we talked about. So for example, let's say instead of putting all $2 million of potential savings to tax avoidance, let's say instead of $2 million, we save the first 1.5 million. Okay, and we reduce, or through tax avoidance, save all of us, me included, 3.5% of a future tax increase. And with that $500,000, that extra 500, right, 1.5 plus 500,000 is 2 million. We build some enhanced elementary experiences for our students that we otherwise could not have or could not afford in our current model. All right. Those were discussions that came out of the stakeholder committee, and I'll let Dr. Ruller now talk a little bit about how those conversations evolved and some of the excitement around the potential.
Good evening. Thanks for sharing, Joe. So some of you have heard me speak probably ad nauseum now about this. Yes, there are potential programs that we could introduce to our schools over time. We don't anticipate that in the first year of Princeton, we would be able to implement a dual language program. Even if we wanted to, that would take considerable planning to bring to the district. Pre-K is something we very much want. And even though there are other revenue streams to help us build a pre-K system through some grants, it requires planning. So we couldn't open in September with, ta-da, we have pre-K. Some things like a STEM or a science program as a special are doable, but they require us to reposition existing staff. So instead of adding 3 teachers to teach science as a special in BV, Frank G, and Furnace Woods, we now have the opportunity to do that by grade level. There are some programs that we're looking at that are specific to a grade level. Imagine now if we stayed the same in neighborhood schools and I had a program I wanted to bring to first grade, I would need to have a teacher at each school to address the first grade in each building. If we were grade banded, all of my first graders would be in one building. I'd only need to hire or reposition one staff member. So there are economies of scale that allow us to dream a little bit about some of the opportunities we would love for our kids to have in front of them. As I said, some require more intensive planning and certainly a decision on the part of the board and the community as to whether we offset our potential tax burden by the full amount of dollars, or we set aside a portion of that money and say, let's add this back while we go grade band. And so that part of that conversation obviously is still to be had.
Great, thank you, Margaret, and Laura. I hope that answers your question. It's about, and that really comes from the feedback from the committee in terms of some of the opportunities that the Princeton plan could pose over time. I've said in other conversations, probably some PTA meetings, we've had so many lately, I'm sure it was in this forum too, that parents also to an extent are looking for a greater incentive to support this, a greater reason. Otherwise, perhaps we're just reshuffling students and we're going to magically save money on our taxes over the next 10 years. The question is that good enough? Is it worth it? And I think if we approach this with a carrot, meaning that there's a greater potential for enhancing our elementary program through exactly some of the examples Dr. Roller just mentioned, that has been received more positively because we're able to bring something new to our district, and we'd be able to bring a new experience to our children that in our current model and in years past we were not able to provide. So I hope that helps. We have a number of questions and statements from Oliver Imbert, so I'm going to zip through them. I know some of them have been answered. The first one is the cost comparison between the Princeton plan and the status quo. We've been talking about that earlier today and in previous meetings. So the rough estimate is around $2 million. Yes, it includes reducing 14 staff, which none of us are excited about. But as we said, we have some shifting demographics. We have an enrollment decline in the last 10 years of 10%. So we have lost about 240, 260 children in terms of enrollment over the last 10 years. And certainly that enrollment decrease has been exacerbated in certain parts of our community. For example, Furnace Woods. In the last 10 years, the Furnace Woods enrollment has gone down by over 30%. 10 years ago, Furnace Woods had over 300 students, and we're projecting next year when school opens in September, Furnace Woods will have just over 200. So when we talk about economies of scale and efficiencies and being able to provide access to similar programs in all three elementary schools, when you have that disparity in enrollment, and especially the distribution of those students by grade level, it really creates some challenges for us, and I'm sure we'll get into that in a little bit. Oliver also commented that a 20 to 40-minute bus ride each way is a lot of stress for elementary students. It will make them more tired when they arrive in school and not ready to learn. Let me just keep reading. Is this taken into consideration? It would create a tiresome overall rhythm for elementary school. So in certain instances, the bus ride may be longer. I can tell you right now that students at BV, some students at BV are on the bus for about 30 minutes. Same thing with Frank G. Furnace Woods has bus routes in the 25 to 30-minute range as well. So that time frame between 20 and 40 minutes is somewhat typical. I mean, certainly not for all students. The closer you live to a school, certainly the quicker your bus ride. We have talked a lot at recent meetings about how long it takes to get from one side of the district to the other. And if you live in the extreme Furnace Woods area and you're going to the high school, or you live in BV and you're going to the middle school, both middle school in the backyard of Furnace Woods, your bus ride is a little bit longer than your elementary one. It's about 30 to 40 minutes. We have heard some positives or some potential positives of longer bus runs, and we heard that from members of the stakeholder committee who themselves have children that experience longer bus runs. And it could be an opportunity for kids to get their homework done or just chill out and relax or build friendships. So certainly that will be a change for some students, but it is also not uncommon in our region that there are bus runs that exceed 30 minutes. Oliver also adds that, let's see, in the SWOT presentation at the board meeting a couple weeks ago, the Princeton plan is presented as an opportunity to teach resilience to transition, while it's also a threat, while the threat is a disruption to a stable environment. Don't you think imposing 3 moves during an elementary child's education would slow down performance, would create fatigue and stress for the arrival of the new building, 3 times readapting to new faculty, new teachers, new principals, new bus routes, new schedules? So we asked that question. In fact, Lisa Schuchman and her team spent a lot of time talking to our colleagues in Ossining, Somers, and Tarrytown about transitions, how to help students with transitions, transitions that may not go well for children or children that really rely on consistency. And before I turn it over to her, I'll share that a lot of those, well, I shouldn't say a lot, all 3, Somers, Tarrytown, and Ossining, said that their students have adapted very, very well to the transitions, that they spend a lot of time practicing, they spend a lot of time getting ready. And remember, when students transition from school A to school B, they're transitioning with 150 to 180 of their friends because they're moving by grade level. And by moving by grade level, the district and those 3 districts I mentioned can provide a lot of unique opportunities. Field trips to go see the new school, walk the halls, meet the new teacher. The principal comes down and has lunch with students. Typically, the PTAs are very involved in working together. And you're right. The presentation did say it's an opportunity to learn transitions. We are really concerned. I think all of public education is concerned about the transition into middle school. Those 3 school districts said that that's not a concern because students have learned skills of adapting and adjusting and being able to advocate for themselves even when they're in a newer environment. So I'll let Lisa Schuchman talk a little bit about what her team discovered and how our school counselor and social workers and those folks will be a support.
Thank you. So I think Joe said a lot of it already, really creating a smooth transition plan, being very particular in when we would meet with new staff transitioning from one building to another, but keeping our social workers and school counselors and school psychologists in the loop and in certain buildings and allowing them to have that transition and a handoff. We've been very fortunate that Ms. Polito has been with every kid in the elementary school, so every student K-5 knows her. Either if they're in person or remote, she's been doing some lessons online. So we would be very particular if the Princeton plan is put in place on how we would roll out a transition plan. Of course, we would involve, our teachers and our administration and our PTAs to make sure things are smooth and students feel comfortable with this transition. In most of the schools, as Joe had said, transition seemed to be quite smooth because they all became one. So we would all be the sailors, where at Terrytown, they were all the horsemen. So that was like the big thing. You were going to the next level of the horsemen. And we would really, play on that and really enforce that with the kids and make that part of that transition. And I think it's an important thing if we do go to the Princeton plan to make sure that we have that thorough plan together and we're ready to support students and staff and parents when we do transition.
Joe, if I could just jump onto that for a quick second. I think one of the things we heard loud and clear from all 3 of our partner communities, Ossining, Tarrytown, Somers, was how excited the kids were to go from one building to the next. When you are grade banded, the building takes on the personality of that age range. So you can imagine how interesting we could make the aesthetics of a school to match an age range, the subject matter that is taught at those grade levels. And the kids are excited to oh, I wonder what the next school is going to be like. And of course, if they have siblings that are moving ahead of them, they're enticed by their siblings' experience to anticipate what is to come. And of course, the benefit is, as Joe said, they are traveling with 100 of their very best friends. So that was an important question, and I thought our partner communities did a great job of helping us better understand that.
Thank you. Oliver's next question was talking about implementing the Princeton plan. How many families have at least 2 or 3 children that would be affected? Meaning we would, parents of elementary children would have students in multiple schools. That's a really good piece of data that we started collecting today. So we'll be able to report back on how many families at any given time would have children in 2 or more elementary schools in this model. I can tell you this, that through our research and feedback, and even our own families saying that that model already happens. We have families that have high school, middle school, and elementary children at the same time. And even in our elementary schools, we do have families, more than you would think. We have families that could have multiple children in different elementary schools. Not all of our elementary schools house the same programs. So if you are a child that attends maybe BV because they have a program that meets your needs, yet your sibling attends Frank G because that's where you live, we currently have that for more than dozens of students. And so we've had some families who have joined these meetings and talked about their experience and said that it's, they work closely with the school, and all 3 elementary schools work closely with each other to make sure parent-teacher conference, for example, is not the same night, or PTA meetings, or so on and so forth. Same issue as we discovered, as Margaret and Lisa talked about with our conversations with Somers, Terrytown, and Ossining as well. We know that will be a challenge for some families. We had a conversation today with Mother Connection. We've had many conversations, but as recently as today, about how we can support them and vice versa in terms of before and after school care, because we know that will be, that's a priority for families. So in terms of the data, we don't have that for you today, but we know that there will be some mitigation strategies to work with families who have children in multiple schools. We know that's going to be a reality for many. Oliver's next question, or I guess sort of statement: children in elementary grades benefit greatly from older children through educational support and understanding of their next stage by seeing it on a daily basis. Implementation of the Princeton plan, aside from breaking up siblings, would remove that asset for all children. How would it be addressed? So in 2 of the 3 elementary schools, in the Princeton plan, they would be basically physically connected, or at least contiguous to a school with older children. So, you know, obviously Furnace Woods and the middle school are in each other's backyard, and the same with Frank G and the high school. So we would make sure that we have the opportunities for those students, as they currently do, not in today's situation, but students from the middle school had always had a presence at Furnace Woods, and the students at the high school had a presence at Frank G. So that is something we absolutely would want to continue to do. And we do know that at least in 2 out of 3 elementary schools, as they are now, they'll be very, very close to older students who can come and volunteer and mentor and read and help and support and play with students as they currently do. So we don't see that as a big hurdle, and those were some questions that our stakeholder committee asked Somers, Terrytown, and Ossining as some follow-up, and they too made some accommodations for that to continue to happen. And the last, let's see, last comment from Oliver: implementation of the Princeton plan requires a lot of preparation. It would disrupt an already disrupted daily life because of COVID. Why is the implementation being considered for this school year? I would say it's being considered, period. And then the conversation is if it's a valid way of pursuing, when would it make sense to implement? The reason it's being considered now is because we know that the financial situation with regards to Indian Point is not going away. The revenue is still going to be greatly reduced, even though we're in a pandemic. We began this conversation in terms of talking about potential restructuring, and that conversation was articulated in the 84-page cost analysis that's on our website. That cost analysis had recommendations ranging from closing schools to having 5th graders in the middle school to the Princeton plan, and also the option of doing nothing, of course. So our financial situation is not changing. We have heard very clearly that maybe now is not the time to do this, but wait a year. That is certainly a theme among many families. However, there is a growing chorus to say that this year has been anything but normal. So if you are going to make a significant change, make it for next year, as opposed to returning students to their home schools to just rearrange them in September of 22. So there are 2 schools of thought, but both of them have been communicated very, very clearly to us. We know that we are currently in a pandemic. I'll say it now, and I've said it before. The guidance is changing. The needle is moving as we speak. I can't tell you what the rules or the requirements are going to be for education in New York State in a month from now, let alone next September. We don't even know if people have to quarantine if they go away on spring break next week. So we have many moving targets because we're at the mercy of the County Department of Health, the State Education Department, so on and so forth. The reality is we wanted to start this work. We wanted to start the exploration last March. In fact, the first stakeholder committee meeting was set for March 27th, and obviously that didn't happen because of the pandemic, and ultimately we were shut down. But the board believed it was an important conversation to continue to have because the impetus for discussing the Princeton plan was financial in nature. And what we learned are that there are some other opportunities and there are some other challenges with considering the Princeton plan. So while the focus was to determine could this be implemented in September of 21, in 6 months from now, there also is relevant of a discussion to consider it for September of 22 for the reasons Oliver, you share, and what we just talked about. So we're about halfway in here, or 30 minutes in. I say halfway because most of our conversations have been right around an hour, and we want to try to stick to a time limit to respect everyone's time. So with that, we have about a dozen friends here on the Zoom, including Oliver and I believe Laura and Agnes, who asked questions. So if you want to raise your hand or if you want to come off mute, we'll try to do this as orderly as possible to have a conversation. It looks like Erica chimed in on the chat. Erica, do you want to come off of mute and give your comment or question?
Sure, I can do that. Well, you just said that, there's the argument that a lot of kids are not, why we're unusual as it is, but aren't most of our elementary school students in their homeschools right now? How many children are not in their homeschools and how many are remote in the elementary level right now?
So we have 11 full classrooms dedicated to remote instruction, and that's around 150, 160 students. And we have a number of students who are coming to school every day, coming from one neighborhood school to a different neighborhood school because of space restrictions. So we do have, we actually have two Princeton plans or two small examples of Princeton plans working right now, both in-person instruction in some classrooms, and certainly all 11 of our full remote classrooms have children from at least 2, if not all 3 elementary schools. And what I hope I clarified was input and discussions being shared or feedback being shared with us that some families believe that implementing the Princeton plan as soon as September of 21 is not a bad idea, or they're not as concerned about it because this year has been abnormal. And so having students go to a different elementary school next year, kind of what's the big deal? We've been through a lot of change over the last 12 months. A little bit more is not going to, my words, not going to be a big deal. Now, you certainly could disagree with that and dispute that. I just wanted to share that as Oliver, commented that maybe we shouldn't be doing this in a pandemic, and that has been a theme. We have had a number of families who look at it the opposite way. So that's all.
Yeah, no, I thank you. I just wanted to clarify that because the number of kids that were actually in the buildings is a lot. So but are a few that are not. So.
Yep. I think again, quick math. We have 11 remote classes, and I think they're anywhere between 15, Margaret, 15 and 20 students. So again, 150 to 180 students is pretty fair. That's about a full grade level. That's about 20% of our elementary students. Alice, you kind of raised your hand. You put in the chat you'd like to say something. So go ahead, Alice. Why don't you come up?
Sorry, it's Agnes. It's Agnes, not Alice.
Oh, Agnes. I'm sorry, Agnes.
Yes. I'm one of the voices you may not have heard from previously in these forums. I know that they were directed initially to parents with students in the elementary schools, because those are the ones who would be very much affected. However, I just want to know that I had a child go all the way through Hendrick Hudson High School. She graduated in 2012. I've lived in this district since 1996. And now I'm one of the, quote, seniors who still is very active in this community and still very much wants to remain in this community. I would never vote against a school budget. I want to keep, that would keep programs in place for all the students in this district that they enjoy the same sorts of things my daughter did. However, there's a huge, huge financial hit to this community. And maybe people who are not as directly involved as those who have children in the schools need to be heard from as well. The cost saving is enormous. And I think the board has a huge responsibility to take that into account, not just for all the people that have children in the schools, but for everyone who lives in this district. There are so many people who have lost their jobs, who are going to have difficulty staying in this district. And I think any kind of a tax increase of the level that you're talking about is just not going to be palatable to a huge majority of this community. And I am saying that, and that I am very much in favor of the Princeton plan. In addition to the amount of tax savings it would result for everybody in this district, it's going to provide one other thing that we've talked about for years. And yes, I remember how many times this Princeton plan came up in all the years my daughter was in school. It's going to provide equity, and that's something that we've often talked about, but doesn't seem to have come up in today's discussion. But by having all the children in one age level in the same building, it's going to provide a much more equitable playing field. And that's just what I wanted you all to know. I don't know how much outreach you've done to the community that doesn't have kids in the schools, but if there's a budget proposition coming out, everybody has to vote on it. And I think a budget increase in the area of which you're talking about without the Princeton plan, without implementing the Princeton plan for the fall of 2021, I just don't think that's going to be palatable to a large portion of the community.
Thanks for your comments, Agnes. A couple points I'd like to respond to. One, I'll talk about, you mentioned that you no longer have students in the district. I think that's a really, well, it's not that I think, it is a really big segment of our community. In November, there were 14,000 registered voters in our school district in November. Some quick math, we have around 2,300 students, and we're going to make some very bold assumptions here. Assume every child, all 2,300 students, have two parents that live in our school district and are registered voters, all right? So let's say that's 4,600 votes from parents, all right? Let's include our, and again, a very big leap here. Let's assume we have 200 students that are in 12th grade, and let's assume they're all registered to vote. So we'll add them. So 4,600 and 200, we're doing live math here, 4,800 potential voters of parents and students out of 14,000. We are one of the few communities, suburban communities in Westchester, where we have a significant population of taxpayers that no longer or never had children in the district. And there are many, many reasons for that. Our community is super, super affordable. Our community is very, very beautiful. It's easy to get places. It's really a destination in terms of where we are in Westchester and the access we have to really special places. It is not lost upon me, first of all, superintendent, but also our board, that we need to make sure that we have support from our entire school community, whether it's a school budget every May or a bond proposition or something as significant as reorganizing the elementary schools in order to save some revenue. So that's really important data that I like to share with folks, because those are facts in terms of what our current demographics are in terms of registered voters and how we're conducting outreach. Typically, Agnes, just so you know, we have these conversations with the Buchanan seniors and Verplank seniors, but they have either not been operating or certainly not operating in person. But we're trying to get the word out to engage the community as best we can. Another piece you mentioned is equity, and equity has been thrown around over the last number of weeks in our school community. And I'm just going to reiterate a presentation we gave last week, and that's going to be repeated tomorrow. Next year, and this is legitimately next year based on your zip code, children in 5th grade are going to have many different experiences. If you're a 5th grader going in the Furnace Woods, there will be 27 children in that class. If you're a fifth grader going into Frank G, there could be as few as 19. If you are a first grader, if you're going into first grade next year, there could be as few as 11 students in your first grade class in one school, and there could be as many as 20 first grade students in the first grade class in another school. The reality is the sands are shifting in our community. Our demographics are changing. Our enrollment is declining. As I mentioned earlier, next year, Furnace Woods is projected to have 208 students, while Frank G is projected to have 406. There are a lot of reasons why our enrollment's declining, and I don't need to spend time getting into those, but the reality is our district's makeup and the distribution of students by zip code across our 3 elementary schools is much different. And I think we've learned through this exploration that it's not just only a financial endeavor, but we have to look at other possibilities as well. And so we've had a number of conversations. In fact, I believe every public meeting we've had in the last 2 or 3 weeks, we've gotten into conversations around class size, and that really is the gatekeeper. That's the starting gate. To be able to communicate to every parent that it doesn't matter where you live, that you're going to have 20 or 21 students in grade X, it doesn't matter, is something that we have not been able to guarantee to families in the last 20 years, because our attendance zone is based on what street you live on. And that creates some inequities, not on purpose, but it creates inequities based on factors and variables that the school district can't control. We cannot control who moves into neighborhoods or who moves out. We can't control who's coming with children or who is not. I moved to this community without children. I've got a rescue dog over there, but my neighbor just had a baby, so their child in 5 years is going to join our district, hopefully. So the only thing we can share is what our history has been, what our projected enrollment looks like, and how that may change if we organize students differently. So thank you for your comment, Agnes, and I hope that helps. Anyone else like to come off of mute, have a question or comment? We're trying to keep this conversational, so to the
Yes,
best we can.
I have
Okay.
a comment, or actually, I'm sorry. I think I saw somebody else come off. Did you want to go?
It's okay. You can go ahead.
Okay. Yeah, I participated in a couple of forums recently. I just really recently found out about the whole Princeton plan. I, like one of the other speakers, had children who have graduated several years ago. And so anyway, so I really haven't been involved. A lot of times once your children graduate, you kind of just move on to different things. So in any event, so I saw this, I said, oh, let me, see what's going on with this. And so I had brought up the impact of the Princeton plan on academics. And the conversation went that it really wasn't based on academics. It really wasn't the reason to have the Princeton plan. That everybody was getting a good education in all the schools, and it sounded reasonable explanation. So so I just, again, out of curiosity, I started looking into the school. I started looking at the stats, and I have to say I was blown away at the decline of the standards in all 3 of the elementary schools. I was so disheartened by those results that I saw. BV with the 60% rate that's not even proficient. Frank G. Lindsay barely making 50% proficiency. Furnace Woods has declined probably by a good 20% or so. I was blown away at those results. And it seemed to be over the last, say, 10 years. It wasn't any 1 or 2 years. So going back to my initial question of how does this plan impact academics, I think comes even more so to the forefront, because now you're taking all these kids in an environment, grade banding, where percentage wise, there'll be more students performing below the standards than above the standards. So I think a big impact of the community, at least this would be my concern if I still had children in the schools, what is going to be the impact on those, say, children that are at or meeting standards in a population where a lot of people are underperforming? So how, academics has to be in the mix. And what is the administration doing to bring these kids up to at least the standard when we're not a large student population? We have a few hundred kids per building. I find it hard to believe that we can't get these kids in all the schools at the minimum level required. I'm just blown away by those results. So I would like to know what is being done, especially in BV, to get those students up to standard. And secondly, if we're such in a money crunch, what kind of programs can we possibly offer these students? Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Boy, a lot to digest. I've got 3 pages of things I could say, and I know Margaret does as well. So I'm going to try to not take up all the airspace, but I'll say a few things. Boy, where do I start? The research on the research and the meta-analysis of the research on the Princeton plan is clear, is that there are no studies that are significant to prove that moving to the Princeton plan will guarantee increased student achievement. Okay, there's no correlation. There's no study to suggest a correlation. In fact, we published that research on our website. So we were very clear that this endeavor was to talk about or to discuss how we could reduce expenses, all right, and reduce tax increases to the community without reducing or eliminating opportunities for students. All right, so that's the first thing I want to make abundantly clear. And again, the research that we've provided from third-party groups have suggested that moving to the Princeton plan will not guarantee any increase in student achievement. What it will do, which we've shown, is it will provide more equity in terms of access. That we will be able to demonstrate that regardless of where you live, within 1 or 2 students by grade level, you're going to have pretty much the same number of children in front of each teacher, not 27 in one zip code and 19 in another. All right. And starting with equitable class size across all facets of the district, all neighborhoods or region of the district, will give us a better opportunity to impact student achievement. All right, now let's talk about the student achievement measures. You mentioned in the last 10 years. I'll tell you this, in the last 10 years, that students that have taken elementary state assessments in the last 10 years have resulted in our high school being the top 100 in the country multiple times, identified by Project Lead the Way as one of a handful, and I dare I say one of 2 or 3 schools that were identified by Project Lead the Way. We're a top 20 high school in the county, and those are results over the last 3 or 4 years of which students have taken state assessments in the last 10. All right, so the correlation between doing well as a 3rd grader on a state assessment does not give us any indication of what their success will be in high school, or the fact that our high school offers 41 classes for college credit between 9th and 12th grade. All right. As the superintendent, I'm telling you that the state assessments are disgustingly flawed. All right. They are political football that have been used in the last 10 years to rate teachers against each other, to pit communities against other communities, to be used for evaluative and promotion purposes, meaning merit pay or people not getting a raise. And the state assessments, quite frankly, have become a joke. Over the last 8 years, no 2 years of a state assessment for children between grades 3 and 8 have been the same, meaning they have not provided us any meaningful information about student achievement over time or about teacher effectiveness. All right. In fact, in 2014 and in 2015, parents in our community in New York State had had enough. And they petitioned their local elected officials, they petitioned the state education department, and they boycotted. They did not send their children to come to school for 2 weeks in the spring to be tested or to have a test placed upon them. The stress level of students were through the roof. They were sitting in rooms for 3, 4, and 5 hours. They were taking more than 4 or 5 days to take the state assessment, and it was not giving us any credible feedback. We wouldn't even get the results for months. Families wouldn't get the results for months, and teachers weren't provided with any information to inform their instruction or to inform student achievement. So if you look across New York State, not just at Hendrick Hudson, but look at the ebb and flow of student achievement and state assessments, you would find the same thing. I'd also argue that the opt-out rate or the test refusal rate in our school district and statewide has statistically rendered those tests useless. They are statistically insignificant measures of student achievement. So I'm passionate about this, and I hope you do not take my passion personally, but I'm really I'm excited that you raise this, because there is a really big misnomer in terms of parading in a bunch of 8, 9, and 10-year-olds to sit for the governor or the president or the Senate or you name it state assessment, thinking that that's going to tell us how well students are performing or whether or not Hendrick Hudson is a good district, a bad district, or a so-so district. All right. The achievement and the performance of what our students are doing at the commencement level, the universities and colleges they're going to, they're walking out of high school with a year of college under their belt. They all came from all 3 of our elementary schools, and they apparently are part of poor achievement or low achievers in the eyes of data crunchers in Albany and Washington, D.C. So that's my soapbox, but I'll let Dr. Roller comment a little bit more because she works very intimately with the elementary teachers around the assessments.
Well, thank you very much. And I do want to comment right after you, Dr. Aruler.
Oh, no problem. So I won't talk about the tests since Joe did that quite eloquently, but I will say that as every other district in New York State, we have to develop local benchmarks, which are just as important as a New York State assessment that a child sits for one time each year. Our local assessments are administered at least 3 times a year, if not more, by our classroom teachers. And it is that data that guides our instruction day to day. I'm very thrilled to say this out loud because I've been studying this closely to look for the impact of the COVID situation. A few years ago, when I came to the district, we were sending approximately 27 to 28% of our students into AIS for reading support. Today, we are averaging about 14% of our students across the district, across the 3 elementary schools. That is a phenomenal increase in outcomes for our kids. It is directly related to the incredibly hard work that our classroom teachers have done and our AIS reading teachers have done through professional development. We've changed some of our programs, some of our approaches. They've worked tighter as a team, and all of those kudos go directly to them. Our middle school as well has just done unbelievable work with closing reading gaps. Our special ed children, thanks to a change in program a few years ago under Lisa's guidance, have made tremendous progress. So we are moving in the right direction, and it is really unfortunate that, like many other districts, it's not just Hendrick Hudson, so much of the work that we're doing and so much of the progress that we're making is demeaned every year when those results are shared. Lisa and I made a strong case last February up at the state level about just what we're talking about. The fact that our local benchmarking tells a very different story from the state test results. And we are using quality products to create and develop and administer those local benchmarks. This is not an opinion from a classroom teacher. This is a well-developed and well-researched tool that is being used to measure student achievement. So I am very proud of the work that we've done at elementary to move the needle, and we will continue to do so.
And as we're identified as a school, we also have to remember that some of those test results are multiple years old. And we're looking at test results for kids that are now sophomores in high school. which is a huge impact on what we are currently doing. As Dr. Reller had said, that we are really taking research-based technologies and programs and implementing them not only in gen ed, but special ed, and seeing large increases with our student population of reading. We've changed programs, we've implemented new things to actually help all students, but I'm speaking from special ed specifically. So we also have to be careful. I mean, we can look at the data. The data is okay to look at, but we also have to remember some of this data is very old and it's not reflective of what we currently have. And that's the case we tried to make at the state level. We're being targeted for something for kids in, I think it was 3rd, 4th, and 5th grade, if I remember, Margaret, and they're actually sophomores in high school. So those are things that we also need to look at. And, you know, if you don't know that, which we didn't know as we were up at the state arguing with them, that becomes a significant piece of evidence to review as well.
Right. Well, thank you for your comments. I appreciate it. But just it also needs to be considered when people look to move into communities. The first thing they look at is schools, and they are looking at that data. The data that I was looking at was as current as 2018, 2019. So it was relatively in the not so distant past. And I don't want anybody to misconstrue that I'm blaming teachers. I think the teachers are doing a phenomenal job. I quite honestly, I mean, I would look more towards the administrators as to their programs, their curriculum that they're asking the teachers to implement. And I don't know, and I'm just speaking from, I don't know what the curriculum looks like. Like I said, my children have graduated a number of years ago, but it's still an important piece of data that people look at. And that, you know, I can kind of maybe go along with some of what you're saying if the numbers were, you know, maybe not below 50%. You start hitting 50% and below, there has to be something to that data, and it's concerning. So then again, that goes to the point now of cost. I'm all in favor of doing whatever it takes to get all children up to whatever standard is required. So what is the cost, or what are we doing to get these students you know, up to that standard? Because right now, BV, I believe, is under the government watch. So you're kind of mandated to get those test scores up, regardless of not, because that's the data that they're looking at. And I believe now, I mean, I look back on some of the data, it fell and then it's kind of flat. Like I'm not seeing any vast improvement, at least looking at that one particular benchmark. So what's being done so we don't have a government takeover of that school, or lack of, I don't know what actually happens, but that district, that school has been on the watch list for a number of years.
So I'll comment on that, and I'll let Lisa and Margaret finish my comment, and then we'll move on. I know Mr. Imbert wants to weigh in, and he had sent in some questions. I think it's important to look at, if we're going to talk about bad data, and we're talking about a bad assessment that gives us bad data and that it's creating concern or conversation in our community. Two things you have to look at: how many students didn't take the exam and what the performance was of the students that did, and how that basically multiplies in the eyes of the state. And Margaret and Lisa led a contingency. Well, they were our contingency, debating with the state education department, because the chief reason that Buchanan Verplank Elementary School was identified in a need improvement or targeted school or needed help is because of how many students did not test, because parents had enough. They kept their child home. They did not want them to be stressed out over a test that was meaningless. They didn't want them to experience, to have experiences that basically were not worth it, that the input was not worth the output. And it was very, very concerning. And New York State, appeasing to government requirements so that the government could pay New York State could pay school districts, did not care. They did not care that so many families in New York State kept their children home for these reasons. And I'll let Margaret and Lisa talk about their conversation with our liaison at the state, and then we'll move on.
It's more, I don't want to talk about the liaison. I think what I want to say is, I think the Princeton plan, and this is just my personal opinion, is something that helps us with equity. You're right, BV is our lowest performing school, but it's not because of our teachers. It's because of where we are in things, and we really have to address things. How many special ed kids were in the building? How many didn't take it? So I think the Princeton plan is we grade band allows us to have the kids in one spot, really focus with kids and parents and talk about testing. And I think that's something that Margaret and I have led this year, is a whole parent and teacher task force to how to communicate with our families, how to talk to them about testing, because a lot of this, the scores of BV that you're seeing are students that did not take it. And some students were counted 3 or 4 times, or excuse me, 2 to 3 times based on the number of tests they took. So it's a triple whammy. If they did poorly in one and well in others, then that triple whammy is what continues to hurt us.
Right.
So I just wanted to explain that. So sorry, Margaret.
No, that's okay. You know, I don't want this to become a conversation around test scores. We can certainly talk a lot more another evening and explain how the calculations are made and how interesting it's fixed, if you will, and skewed in one direction. What I'd like to say about equity is, yeah, we do have the same curriculum across the 3 schools. I'm very proud of that. Our teachers are very proud of that. They work hard at staying close to one another in instruction through all the content areas that we're responsible for as elementary folks. That being said, when the kids coming into one school are what we call behind before they get started, if you will, because of their life experiences or different life experiences, the opportunity to be exposed to the same opportunities that another community might have, we are working harder and sometimes with much larger class sizes to deliver that curriculum and give each of those students what they need. And that really is what equity is all about. It's that every student gets what they need in the moment. So for us to be able to look at moving from 20 or whatever the cap in kindergarten is 22 right now, which in my opinion is ridiculous, but it is. To have a classroom with 22 kindergarten students and try to deliver the exact same curriculum that's being delivered across town with 11 kids is a very, very, very different experience for the teacher and for the students receiving that instruction. If I have 8 kindergarten teachers, I can now create 8 well-balanced, well-distributed classes with roughly the same class size for each teacher, which means that all of our kids have the same opportunity to have more of my teacher's attention, more of the TA's attention, more opportunities for differentiation in my classroom. So that's really what we're talking about here. When you put the whole grade together, you can address those inequities in ways that we can't do in a single building. And by the way, that's an advantage for students too. You know, Furnace Woods having 1, 2, 3 sections at most, and I don't even know, I think we do have one grade level with 3 at that school. There's not a lot of wiggle room to move students around. Whether you have a student on student concern that you'd like to separate, or whether you have a student teacher concern that you'd like to address, there's just not a whole lot of places to move people. Placement, and I know we don't spend a lot of time talking about this in a community, but the placement of students with teachers and with peers is so critical to that year's academic performance. And there's a ton of research about that. So for me, the advantage that we have by going grade band is that opportunity to bring an equitable experience to all of our students in all 3 schools if we grade band them. I'll stop talking now.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you. Thanks for your question and comment and allowing us to talk about some things that didn't come up on the questions. But Mr. Imbert, you have been very, very patient. Thanks for sending in your comments and questions in advance. And I'd like to turn it over to you for a few moments if you have any follow-up.
Yes, thank you so much. I appreciate it. I'm sorry, I don't know any of you because we just moved here to the area, so we're new, and I want to thank you for spending the time with all my questions. I'm sorry I had so many. I did not have time to come to the other meeting, so you're getting all the questions at once, and I really appreciate your time. Before I give what I wanted to share, I'll just make a few comments to the replies that you guys gave me about my questions. The first one is about the school, but well, my wife and I have 3 young girls in Furnace Woods, all in elementary. So that's why you're getting all my questions, because that would, I mean, Princeton plan would just change everything. We moved here because of Furnace Woods. So it's too bad for us now, everything's changing, which I understand, and it's not the point. And also whatever I'm talking about, it is about my own experience. So I'm not pretending to say, give me all the good things for my daughter to myself. Don't give good things to other schools and other students. Really, we moved here because we know the school district does the best for everybody. So, you know, we totally understand that, and we're not saying otherwise. So for the school buses, my comment was about the fact that the elementary kids are younger. And sometimes we do tend to compare it to middle school and high schools. And I understand some high schoolers and middle schoolers have longer bus rides, but when you're, you know, between 6 and 10, the experience is much different. And for example, when you say they're going to do homework, I'm sorry, but my first grader is not going to do homework in the school bus. And I don't think my 5th grader is either. Maybe she'll read something, but I don't. So, and I think when we're talking about all the changes, it's about elementary only. And I think the reason why there's an elementary, whether it's Princeton plan or neighborhood schools, is because it's a special age. They're special transitions and very important. You learn to read, you're learning to write. I mean, you're learning social context and so forth. Middle school, high school, way different. So, you know, and so school buses, it's not just about you have to go far from school. It's about those young kids. And so when we're talking about, you know, very good points about Princeton plan, you know, equity, smaller class sizes, yes, but what I want to share is that, yes, it's going to be better in that sense, but with kids where a lot of them are going to be a little bit more tired than in the neighborhood school. So you know, sometimes I get scared that it's not taken into consideration. We only hear about everything's great with Princeton plan, and we forget about the rest. So sometimes I wish we could have a little bit more of the comparisons. Yes, we're going to gain this with Princeton plan, but we're losing this from the neighborhood schools. So how do we address that? So it's a little bit what I was trying to make, you know, come across with my questions. Same thing with the moving of the buildings. You're moving 3 times during your elementary years. I don't have a doubt that you do a good job. I know you would, because you're doing a good job now, so it'll be a good job. But I know for a fact when they're moving, although it's 150 of them moving at the same time and they're all excited, they'll still need some adjustment. So it's going to take a couple of weeks to just get into it. And so there will be disruptions. Of course, there are good things about the Princeton plan, but you know, let's not forget about what on the concrete level is going to happen. So what are the plans for the future for that? And that comes to my next and my final thing is, you know, you guys talked about the potential and the dream about the Princeton plan. But we know for a fact, let's say we're changing the Princeton plan in September, you know, it's going to take a lot of getting ready for everything. And you said it perfectly. The first year, impossible to implement any of the dreams because it's impossible. So let's say maybe it's the second year. So second year is the first year. Third year. By third year, I've lost my, you know, my 5th grader is already in middle school. My 4th grader, you know, is in 5th grade. So it's just my 2nd grader just going all around all these changes. And by the time Princeton plan is really benefiting to everybody, my 3 kids are out of elementary school. So that's what I'm saying today. And that's again for my own experience, because we moved here so that we would have what the neighborhood schools bring. And again, I hear everything about the Princeton plan, and I'm not saying Princeton plan is bad or neighborhood schools are good. I'm just saying now is neighborhood schools. Let's look at what is good and what is that we're going to lose in the Princeton plan. How do we transfer over, and what do we do for next year? Because when I have my, my kids that are going to whatever school next year, I know for a fact, because we just moved here, so we know what it is to move the kids. They'll adapt, they'll be fine, but you still have those times to readjust, and they're going to lose something. Everybody's going to lose something. Everybody, great teachers, great staff. I'm not saying they're not good. I'm just saying all the changes are going to make it that everybody's going to lose a little bit until everything comes in and makes it better. So in the end, I'm thinking the very important fact is that those $2 million, in the end, even if it's all bad, you might have to do it because of the money. But at least let's be honest. And then, that there are consequences to all these changes that are going to affect everyday lives. Maybe they're going to affect the home property prices. I mean, we know for a fact any change is going to bring some adjustments, and it's going to take time. So, I totally hear everything that is being said. I would expect the board to be more precise in what is going to happen. Not just the dreams, not just the potential, what's happening in September. If we're changing to Princeton plan, here's what's happening. Your school is going to be this one, your kid is going to be in this class, the number of kids, what teachers. Next year, the dual program, let's bring it Arabic, Chinese, I'm all for it. But when is it happening? Because the potential is great, the dream is great. I mean, we all dream about everything, but it's not gonna, for me, I only have 1 year for my 5th grader next year, then 2 years for my 4th grader, and then 3 years for the 2nd grader. So, if you're not going to show me what the next 3 years are going to be, it to me doesn't change anything. So I'm only speaking about myself because that's the only experience I can share. I don't want to speak for anybody, but I just want, in the end, the board to show us, yes, we are worried about the kids. We understand that, equity, better schools, but there'll be more tired. So what do we do? Usually problem, we find a solution, and then it just makes the presentation a little bit easier to go with. Thank you for listening to me. I'm sorry it's late and we all have so many other things to do.
No. Thank you. Thanks for your time and attention. And the good news is, because I'm going to direct you to a meeting that took place on March 10th, because it was recorded and it's on our website and YouTube channel. You asked about some of the notes I took about, we're talking about the Princeton plan, but what about our current model? That was the analysis that our stakeholder committee went through. Was basically identifying the strengths, the weaknesses, the opportunities and threats, the SWOT analysis. Yeah. And there was a lot of really good information that came out to the Board of Education. Oh my goodness, the ice cream man is driving his truck around. That's a sign of spring. It's all right. Pardon me. But the SWOT analysis really did take a deep dive into the potential of the Princeton plan against what we could lose, or what some of the threats are of leaving our current model. Neighborhood schools is one of them. The fact that many families like yourself picked our community and then picked a particular neighborhood in our community because of proximity to the school. The fact that, and we have heard it, and I'll use Furnace Woods for an example, the fact that 3/4 of a child's educational experience is going to take place between Furnace Woods and the middle school, right? I mean, that's a really nice safety net. That's a nice opportunity. Same thing with Frank G. Families who have chosen to move, in the more center part of our district with Frank G. Elementary School bordering the high school. So that certainly has been a theme, and was one of the challenges or one of the weaknesses that we heard very clearly from parents, staff, and community members, weighed against some of the opportunities that the Princeton plan provides, and that really is the debate or the conversation that we're having, today, and that we had a number of times. So if you have an opportunity, I don't know if you did,
I did,
watch
yes.
part of that meeting, but that will provide you, and it sounds like you watched it, but anyone else listening, sort of the thinking behind what rose to the top in terms of the priorities. What were the reasons to maybe cheerlead the Princeton plan, and what were the reasons to really slow down and rethink it? So I'm glad you mentioned that. You also talked about readiness. I've said before, I think there are 2 degrees of readiness. There's readiness on the district's end to be ready to flip the switch. For example, and maybe I won't certainly commit to this, but in 48 hours, we could identify what teachers will be teaching in which school. Because that process is clearly outlined in the teacher's contract, that if we had to move teachers around, there are rules by grade level, by seniority, by experience, and we will follow all of those criteria and all those protocols, and that will streamline the process. Same thing with identifying what schools would house which grade levels, and in fact, some of the prevailing or the initial thoughts have been challenged to us by our facilities director in terms of square footage, bathrooms, making sure that every kindergartner has a bathroom, or even first grader has a bathroom in their school. We heard earlier about proximity to middle school and high school. For example, a year ago, we probably weren't even considering whether or not our smallest school, from a footprint standpoint, Furnace Woods, would make sense for Furnace Woods to have the oldest and biggest elementary kids, the 4th and 5th graders, right? Wasn't something we probably would consider until we thought about, oh my goodness, we basically could eliminate a very stressful transition from 5th grade to 6th grade, because 3 soccer fields, are the difference between Furnace Woods and the middle school. So some of the technical decisions are going to be very easy to implement, because we have been thinking about this and planning for it for quite some time, and that really is also part of the calculus behind potentially implementing this in September of 21. We have been working very schizophrenically in 2 environments, actually 3. What COVID looks like next year, right? Separate from the Princeton plan discussion, just what COVID looks like. If we go back to our normal situation, 3 elementary schools in September, or if we implement the Princeton plan, because we know that we will have a finite period of time if we choose to move forward in September of 21. There are a lot of decisions that we need to wrap up, that we need to test, and we need to be able to communicate. We've also heard from the PTAs, the PTA leaders. All 6 of our PTAs had representation on the stakeholder committee, and particularly the representatives of the elementary PTAs have been asking us to consider hitting pause or slowing it down, because they play a vital role in being a conduit between families and the school and teachers, and providing resources and funding and fundraising to be able to create more equity in terms of programs and access, but also provide programs and resources and supplies and equipment that go above and beyond. So they are anxious for us to make a decision, or the Board of Education to make a decision. And lastly, you mentioned bus rides, right? A theme was, will students be too tired? What will we do about that? I mentioned at the onset, we do have elementary students on the bus 20-30 minutes. That likely, depending on exactly where you live and where you would be going in the Princeton plan, that could increase.
Yeah, sorry, just about the bus rides, we have 20-minute bus rides. It's just that when in the presentations we were told it can go up to 55 minutes. So
I want to be clear. The 55 minutes, we asked some of our neighboring districts that are in the Princeton plan how long their bus rides are, and actually, not to be rude, but I'm looking up that document. It was shared with us that other districts in the Princeton plan do have bus rides up to 55 minutes. And while that is not anything we're excited about, I share that because That is a normal bus ride in Westchester County, depending on where you live. If you live in the extreme corner of Furnace Woods by Hemlock Hill Farm, that bus ride's going to be a lot
That's-
longer, a lot different than if you live.
That's my point. Yeah,
Yeah,
that's my
yeah.
point. It's going to be longer. So what do you do? I mean, you know you're going to have a pool of more tired kids. What do you do? So that's, I'm not saying it's not going to be longer, or I'm just saying it will be longer, and you'll have more tired students in elementary. So a 6-year-old is going to act up differently when he's tired than a 12-year-old.
Yeah,
so
and
that's my point.
yep, and certainly a consideration. I know that our 3 elementary principals who participated in the process, we've begun conversations with them over where they would, if they could choose with a magic wand, what grade level school they'd want to work in. Those conversations have started. So there has been a lot of planning that has not been very public, because we have to, we have to let the process play out, but we need to be ready to act if it is as soon as 6 months. So thanks for your comments. Thanks for joining us. I know your time is limited.
Thank you so much.
Yes. We're around an hour and 20 minutes. Oh, Christina, you have your hand up. Let's go to you, and then I'll ask, or I guess I'll let people know we're going to try to wrap up here shortly around 7:30. But Christina, you had your hand up, so thank you. Welcome.
Yes, hi, thank you. Good evening, everyone, and thank you guys for your time. Since there's a lot of unknowns with all of this, I just have a question about something that we could know. Has anybody done analysis where comparing our school district, the status quo, what it is now, and Peekskill School District, which we're mirroring, and what the scores are between the two districts? Who's outperforming?
Yeah. Again, for the reasons we shared, the very statistically significant reasons and the emotional reasons, we don't even compare those test scores against ourselves, let alone other schools. The other thing I would say is that our district demographics are significantly different than Peekskill, and significantly more different than any of the other districts we border, including Yorktown, Lakeland, and Croton. What also is a wrinkle in trying to achieve any sort of analysis is what Margaret and Lisa mentioned earlier: participation rate. We have fewer students participating because parents don't want their child to experience the misery of the state assessment experience. So we have a limited pool to compare ourselves against others. So for those reasons, we don't, and we haven't, and that's not a cop-out. That's just we value those assessments so little because they give us such little meaningful information.
As the educator, how do you feel we're performing compared to that district?
I compare, Margaret mentioned earlier about our benchmarking. And we take that very, very seriously. Unfortunately, in COVID, it hasn't been as rigorous as we would like. But we review our internal data all the time with our teachers, with our special education staff, with our reading teachers, our support staff. I was asked this question, Christina, last week, earlier in the week. I don't even know what day it is, but I was asked this question before, Mr. Hochreiter, what do you think? I'd say 5 years ago, this community probably wouldn't be having the Princeton plan conversation for a number of reasons. I think we're having it now, certainly because of financial implications, but also significant demographic shifts. So when I look at our projected class sizes for next year, Christina, and I look at the lack of control that we have over class sizes, because we can't control who lives in which neighborhood and how old their children are. We are really, we're crossing our fingers and we're hoping, right? We're hoping fewer kids show up in 5th grade next year at Furnace Woods, and we're hoping some more kids show up in other grades. So as Margaret said, so we have more than just one teacher teaching a particular section. So there are benefits and there are challenges either way we go. But when I look at educational opportunity as a starting line, and we can demonstrate that through the Princeton plan, through organizing students differently, we have more credibility sharing with parents that there are going to be, on average, 19 or 20 students in kindergarten, regardless of where you live, or 21 or 22 third graders, regardless of where you live. That gives us a better opportunity to impact educational outcomes than our current model. And I hope that makes sense. And Mr. Himbert, I just wanted to go back to you because you mentioned something that I didn't talk about. You mentioned the $2 million in savings. Earlier this afternoon, we published on our website. It's a very rustic looking tax calculator with some very important instructions. So if you have your tax bill and you know what your assessed value is, go on our website. We have a tax calculator. You can type in, all you have to type in, there's a red field, delete what's there and type in your assessed value, and you will be able to see projected tax increases comparing the two models, Princeton plan versus status quo, each year over the next 10 years. It's different depending on what your assessed value is. If you have a high assessed value, low assessed value, medium assessed value, it will calculate what your estimated taxes will be each year over the next 10 years. And it ebbs and flows. Some years are smaller than others, but it gives you a good idea in terms of a projection. So Agnes, I should have mentioned that earlier. You mentioned that a resident, a taxpayer no longer with students in the district, and basically you don't want to be taxed out of your house. That tax calculator will give you at least a rough enough estimate of what to expect. Now, there are some
Can I
assumptions we
ask a
have
question
to make.
about that, Joe? I'm sorry to interrupt. I had a
Sure.
question about the home value and stuff. Was an independent study conducted as to how the implementation of the Princeton plan in the district will impact the value of houses within the district?
There isn't, and I'll tell you two pieces of information. One piece is we had a gentleman who was on our stakeholder committee who is in the real estate business and a parent and former PTA leader, said that there is no literature to suggest that the Princeton plan increases or decreases your property value. And I'll take it a step further and say this, that there are other districts in Westchester County that operate in the Princeton plan whose property value is much higher than ours. All right, Yorktown has a version of the Princeton plan. They grade band. They have students in the same place at the same time. They divide it a little bit differently, but they have a version of the Princeton plan. Somers, we mentioned, who we spent time with, they have the Princeton plan. Their property value is higher. And another one that I'm familiar with, because we have one of our principals lives in this district, is Byram Hills, also has the Princeton plan. So, there are different factors as to why school districts have the Princeton plan. And the research that we posted on the website is pretty clear. Most recently, districts who are considering going to the Princeton plan are around enrollment, declining enrollment, and financial considerations. So I would suggest, again, I don't know this, but if Yorktown, if districts like Yorktown, Somers, or Byram Hills were having an adverse effect, or the Princeton plan was having an adverse effect on their property value, I would assume that they would abandon that plan. I grew up in a small upstate New York town. We were in the Princeton plan. Why? Because the property to build the schools and most of the construction costs for the schools were paid for by the SUNY system, because the state university system had to buy property from the school district, and there was an age-old agreement. I just thought everyone went through the Princeton plan in my little, naivete world of being a 5 through 11-year-old. So districts are organized much differently for very specific reasons, and usually those reasons are very, very local. Either to address local issues like we're discussing, or some other reasons. I think we learned at Tarrytown, and Lisa and Margaret, you may correct me if I'm wrong, but they had merged. Tarrytown and Sleepy Hollow were two separate communities that merged. They merged under one umbrella, and they chose to stick with the Princeton plan. So School districts do it for different reasons. But in terms of outcomes and assessment, I would look at, and I think it was Ms. McCann who mentioned it, who did a little review of our last 10 years of achievement in terms of what the outcomes are at the commencement level. So I hope that helps, Christina. I know it's kind of a non-answer, but in terms of some of the discussions we've had and what the research suggests about it.
Okay, thank you. So an independent study then was not conducted.
Not by the district, because the research didn't suggest, the research around the Princeton plan didn't suggest that was a factor.
Okay, thank you. And I heard the ice cream truck too.
Oh, good. All right. Now we're all hungry. Okay, that's a good way to pivot toward closing out our time together. But Michelle, you had your hand up, and we'll end our discussion with you. So if you would, if you have a question or a comment, you can take us to the ice cream truck.
I guess I just wanted to say, it's always a fascinating conversation to listen to. For me, the equity issue is huge. I mean, there are definitely logistics. There's going to be a lot of scrambling for families and people to sort of come to terms with changes. Changes are always hard, but equitability is huge. We currently have 3 different elementary schools, and although we have the same curriculum, it's not the same education. You cannot compare a class of 11 kids to a class of 20 kids in a different school and say that they're getting the same education. You cannot compare one school whose PTA is, more adequately funded than another, so they're bringing in more author visits, they're going on more school trips, more opportunities for the kids, and compare it to another school who doesn't have a fraction of that. I think there's a misconception that home taxes are paid on your elementary school. Houses within the district have actually been redistricted so that they were once Furnace Woods and are now Frank G, or were once Furnace Woods and then became BV. Your taxes are paid to the school district, and that's not going to change. So I think people need to realize that when people are looking at homes, they're also looking at Hendrick Hudson School District, where the kids all funnel together in middle school anyway. So, when everyone's paying to a district, it's not really fair to have this huge discrepancy in education for these formative years, and then have the kids funnel in middle school where some of the kids benefit from the bias. So they're from the school, which maybe typically has higher performing children because they have the benefit of smaller classes or more opportunities, versus, another school where maybe the classes are twice the size, or they have other factors working against them. And I do think some of the kids come into middle school facing some of these biases. So some of the kids are almost set up for success while other ones have to overcome the hurdles. So, I think the Princeton plan addresses this. I think bringing kids together in kindergarten is easier than in 6th grade because, again, when you're in kindergarten, you just want to play with your friend in class. You don't have these preconceived notions of who a person is based on comments you've heard. And I guess I think equity is a huge factor and should definitely be considered. I'm not saying the other things aren't things to consider. I'm not saying bus rides aren't things to consider, although, of the 3 elementary schools, one's average time may be a 15-minute bus ride, and the other 2 schools' average time may be more of a 35-minute bus ride. So it's not really fair to say everyone's bus ride is going to go up so drastically because 2 of the 3 schools have already been dealing with longer bus rides. So I think perception and point of view is sometimes based on the school in which you are currently based, and that should also be taken into consideration.
Well, thank you, Michelle. Thanks for your comments. You brought up some great points. So I appreciate that. Thank you all who have spent the last hour and a half and change with us. Tomorrow, our school board meeting is going to be a little bit different. At 6 o'clock, from 6 to 7, we will be on Zoom, and there have been a number of folks who who have asked to read a statement regarding the potential implementation of the Princeton plan. So from 6 to 7, I believe we have 7 or 8 folks who are going to register their comment, and they are going to deliver that. And then the board will start its normal business at 7 o'clock. We have a couple budget updates as we zero in on finalizing our budget to meet state deadlines, and I'm sure there might be other commentary with regards to the Princeton plan toward the end. So if you want to hear more about community members' perceptions or inputs or their position on the Princeton plan, that will start around 6 o'clock. So you can watch live on our YouTube channel. The weather tomorrow hopefully is just as nice. So, we hope that you join our board meeting instead. So thank you all. Thanks for your commitment. For those of you who we have seen a number of times over the last couple of weeks, thanks for joining us. And to the new faces, welcome. Thanks for being involved and spending time and energy and resources sharing your position and questions with us. And with that, Greg, we could, I guess we're going to stop recording, or we're going to end our live show, and everyone.